Okay, so Jean-Pierre Marquis, besides being a very good friend, is one of the great specialists, possibly the great specialist worldwide in philosophy of category theory. Author a lot of books and papers of the topics, and so that's a really. By the way, also the author of old but very nice paper on the notional foundation of mathematics that we circulated. That you, Peter, made it circulate around us some time ago because you find it very, very nice. And in fact, it is very nice. Okay, so please, the rule is always the same, but you don't know the rule. This is quite informal. We have 2 hours.
Oh, great.
We can take part of it, all of it, a little bit more, it would be complicated. Then there will be a dinner. And so do you agree that if there are questions during the talk for comprehension, or you prefer that all the questions be there?
No, you can interrupt me whenever.
Okay. You know. I don't know whether you could talk.
That's you.
Okay.
All the others, but not you.
Not me. Okay, please go.
First, thank you very much for having me here. It's a real pleasure. It's not my first time here. I was here some years ago for the Graduate conference. And also thank you for being here Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. It's greatly appreciated. It's not obvious. So I'll try to give a post-day philosophy talk. There's going to be a little bit of technical things, but I will rely on your knowledge of the underlying stuff mostly. I think it will be clear, but I'm deviating from some of the standard approaches and in some ways, but I think it will be easily probably clear enough for you to see what I'm trying to do. So the plan is very simple. As I announced, I want to look at Hellman and Shapiro. They published in 2019 a small book on the mathematical structuralism. So I want to look at how they define it, what they present as criteria for a good theory on mathematical structuralism. And then I will try to answer these criteria with what I call a categorical narrative and evaluate it works according to their criteria or whether their criteria work themselves. Okay, so that's the plan. The first part, I'll try to go rather quickly over it because it's just going over Hellman and Shapiro, although there's a lot of material, and I'll present to you not only the criteria, but also their criticisms of category theory, how they criticize it. So that will take a little while, but I don't want to spend too much time. I want to spend more time on my answer to their approach. So I'll try to do that, and I will. I will give you a list of quotes from Hellman and Shapiro, and I will try not to comment them, okay? Otherwise it would be too long. We might come back to them later on, but just to set up the framework. So the theme of structuralism is that what matters to a mathematical theory is not the internal nature of its objects, numbers, functions, functionals, points, regions, sets, etc., but how those objects relate to each other. So that's their definition. Just one comment, the theme. Okay, so it's like a musical analogy here that they're using, that there's a theme with variations. And it's not clear exactly what we're talking about, but that's the main idea. I'll get back. The orientation grew from relatively recent developments within mathematics, notably toward the end of the 19th century and continuing through the present, particularly, but not exclusively, in the program of categorical foundations. So, kudos to Hellman and Shapiro. They were very, very critical when they started writing about structuralism. They're not so critical nowadays. They've done some stuff. They're open, but they sort of recognize that the categorical foundations as pushing the idea of structuralism in a certain direction. Now, a structure is the abstract form of a system which ignores or abstracts away from any features of the objects that do not bear on the relations. No comment on that. Oh, I wish. Forget that. Again, a structure is thus a one over many, is sort of universal. The main difference between a structure and a more traditional universal, such as a property, is that a given property applies to or holds of individual objects, while a given structure applies to or holds of entire systems. I will get back to that later also, if I have time. For now, just remember the link with universal of one over many. So we plan to evaluate each version of structuralism by considering how well it fares on each of the following 8 criteria. So that's what they do in their book. It's a short book, 100 pages long, and they just present the criteria, and then they go over 4 different variations on structuralism, one of which is categorical. All right, so the criteria. First, and one of the most important according to them, what primitives are assumed and what is the background logic. Second, the term axioms is ambiguous as between defining conditions on a type of structure of interest on the one hand, or basic assumptions or assertoric content bearing a truth value on the other. When it comes to the different forms of structuralism, what are these assertoric axioms? Okay, and they'll play with it. Try to remember 1, primitives and the logic. 2nd, assertory nature of the axioms or not. Okay. 3rd, as an especially important case of previous to what assumptions are asserted as to the mathematical existence of structures. Is there indefinite extendability recognized, or is there a commitment to an absolutely maximal universe? So whether you have one or the other, you'll have a variation according to them as to what your family or your structuralism is about. 4th, are structures recognized as a special type of object, or is there a thoroughgoing elimination of structures as objects? If not, what sort of objects are structures, and in particular, what is a mathematical structure, as opposed to not quite sure what, but mathematical structure. 5th, how is our epistemic access to structures understood, and what account of reference to them can be given? 6, as an extension of 5, does the view allow for a face value interpretation of mathematical statements? Or do it have to be interpreted in certain ways and reconstructed in other ways? 7, how are the paradoxes associated with set theory and other foundational frameworks to be resolved by the framework? And finally, how is Benacheras's challenge based on competing identifications of numbers, etc., to be met? That's it. Those are the 8 criteria the approach has to answer to in one way or another, and you are evaluated according to those. Okay, so try to remember we have 8. Some of them are sort of obvious, and frankly, I think they're good. Okay, when you look at them, you think about them, you say, yeah, that's fair. There are fair questions that are actually.
I don't understand one thing. This criteria, the idea is that if you have a satisfactory answer to these questions, you have a good philosophy of mathematics. Structuralism has a satisfactory answer, so it's a good philosophy of mathematics. Or the idea is that according to the way you respond to this criteria, you have a structuralist of a different sort?
Both, I think. So depending on your answers, you'll have one kind or another, but you'll see they actually evaluate the ones I will be talking about, the categorical approach, the standard, the way they understand it. They give an evaluation, right? Using the criteria. So that's good, that's not good, it's man, could be, can do better, stuff like that. Yes.
So I don't know what that refers to Bernard Sharaf's challenge based on completing identification of numbers.
So Bernard Sharaf wrote a paper in 1965. Paul Bernard Sharaf is a philosopher at Princeton. I'll quote something from that paper later on. The basic idea in the paper is the following. So he asked you to imagine two children, Ernst and John, and their parents are logicists, they're fanatics, they really like logic a lot. Okay? And so they decide to raise them and to teach number theory by using certain notations and certain numbers. So Ernst actually learns that 0 is the empty set, 1 is the set, and so on. And John Neumann, his parents will teach him that the natural numbers are the empty set and the ordinals. Okay?
That's not true. There is a very nice joke in the paper. Johnny, Termelo. And Johnny.
Fine.
Okay, that's not so important.
No, but okay, I forgot that. Anyway, so they both learn how to do arithmetic and everything, and blah, blah, blah. And one day they meet at school. And one of them just says to the other something like, 3 belongs to 17. And the other one looks at him and said, what? No, that can't be true. And so they have this discussion and blah, blah, blah. And that's so Bernard Sharaf says, there's something going on here that is really bizarre because we have nice models of the natural numbers. They're very clear. All the operations can be performed and we can have reference. We refer to them clearly. The sense is clear and everything. But clearly there's something wrong here. No mathematician in his right mind would say something like 3 belongs to 17. So what's wrong? Okay, and so he brings forward the idea that, in fact, what we're talking about when we're talking about the natural numbers is a structure. And it is independent of the actual sets that John and Ernst actually learn the structure with. So he's pushing for a structuralist account of the natural numbers. And that was a very important paper. It generated a lot of discussion among philosophers of mathematics from that moment on. And a second paper in 1973 on mathematical truth was also, but I won't talk about it. So that's the challenge here.
And yeah, what's the challenge?
But the challenge is, how is your structuralist answering Bernard Sharaf's problem?
And the problem
Is
is
what?
they by extensionality, these two,
Are not the same.
they can't be identical.
Like-
So it's either
It's normal that the same thing can have different representations.
Yeah.
So I don't see how that's a problem.
okay, good for you. I'll get back to that. Okay.
Like,
The idea is that natural number cannot be object because whether they would be object, if they were the object, they would be completely determined.
if they are what?
They
If
also.
they were object.
I'll get back. Just
If they
hold
were
on to
object,
your
they
idea.
would be
Okay.
completely determined with respect to
Okay.
the property that they have. So it should be have a definitive answer to the question whether one belongs to the other or not. The problem is that any definitive answer to this question depends on reasons that came from arithmetic, are external to arithmetic. So arithmetic is not able to decide whether one or the other. So arithmetic cannot be about particular object, and it should be about something else.
And there are the challenges about what that else is. Okay.
What it is
Got it?
about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to get back to that, but your answer is the mathematician's answer. What's the problem? Okay? And the philosopher says, well, there's a problem. And the challenge is, how do you answer to the problem? Okay. Now, how do they evaluate category theory from these criteria? So I will quote a lot of passages from the book. So the first one, how do they go about it? When it comes, however, to assessing the proposal of category theorists, that category theory serves as a framework for mathematical structuralism, we confront the situation that we lack a generally agreed upon systems of axiom system of axioms as assertions constituting the framework. Well, okay, fair enough. Maybe in the community, there's no clear answer as to the framework that is really providing the structuralist framework from a categorical perspective. What about topos? But once again, these are just defining conditions on a special type of hierarchical structures. They are clearly central to the practice of category theory as mathematics proper, but they do not by themselves address the issues we have listed as essential to a structuralist framework, and I underline here, as a chapter in meta-mathematics. Okay, so fair enough, that's good for mathematicians, they use it all the time, but it doesn't really answer our questions. That's our first answer. There'll be more subtle afterwards, okay?
You say what these issues are like briefly.
Sorry?
The issues that they're mentioning, they do not by themselves address the issues we as
The 8 criteria.
Yeah.
So according, I'll come back to that, okay? They will
But
clarify.
in the end of the story, the criticism is that the category theory is not a philosophical theory. What do we know? It's a mathematical theory.
But they're
So
looking,
cannot ask to
they're
category
saying
theory to get the
it's
job.
good for mathematics, but the meta-mathematics is not so clear, and they'll be more.
Data mathematics
Yes.
is not so clear.
Right, and they're looking, and this is an important point. They're looking for a meta-mathematical answer.
Yeah,
Okay.
that kind of cleared up what I was about to ask, but I guess I was trying, when they're talking about category theory here, are they considering category theory as a foundation or as a tool within?
It's a foundation.
Okay.
That's the question. Exactly. That's precisely the question. So the usual axioms for category theory, that's you start with those and well, come on, can't be. Yeah, right. We agree.
Well, yeah, I guess then the criticism is like, well, what's the, for like set theory that still has.
We'll get there. Thus, if we turn to the question issues on which we have been comparing the various approaches to structuralism, we find ourselves in the awkward position that, with the exception of the third question, remember the third question? Which was we had the what is the logic? Second was the assertor in the nature of the axioms. Third one was again what as to the existence, what do we assert in the existence? With the exception of the third question, there seems to be no definite answers provided due to the under-specification of assertory axioms at the foundational level. So what they're saying here basically is that the axioms for categories, well, you have all these models. They are very different from one of the others. And so how can that provide a proper foundational framework for structuralism? Toposes, well, basically the same thing. If you look at the axioms for elementary toposes, you have all these models that are very different from one another. Do they exist? How do they exist? And they'll press this. Okay, but as such, what they're saying is there's something lacking here. It's just the doesn't assert existence of something in the same way that set theory is that does. So consider one, the choice of primitives and background logic. Here we're not asking about the definition of category or functor, give up categories here, but of a substantive method theory returning to these notions. We cannot even say that first order logic is sufficient. So you see, they're really looking for, and I think this is a good point, basically. There's no meta theory clear. The axioms are clear. It can be satisfied by all kinds of stuff. We know that how they are satisfied in the background theory, which is set theory. No problem with that. But as a foundation, something is not lacking. No, it doesn't assert existence. We presuppose the existence of these sets underlying the whole thing. So again, that's not satisfying.
So there is no underlying logic clearly identified.
Yeah, well, first order, but then the axioms are first order, but then the practice sometimes is not so clear, and the theory is not explicitly stated, at least that's what they say. They'll be more clear in a minute, okay? So now they're just talking very general. So regarding question 2, specifying the assertory axioms of the framework in the absence of these, at least for categories, has been our main complaint thus far. So this goes back to the early 2000s. Hellman has published a paper. It's called the home address problem, where if you look at categories, Well, you have these algebraic axioms with all these models. Where do they live? Okay. Well, the answer for them is sets. But then
Where do the models?
the models, yeah. So the model sets is providing you with the background, with the foundation of your theory. So we're not providing me with a real foundational framework. Something is lacking. Okay, so that's one way of putting it. It is true, however, that we can address the third question on whether structures are eliminated as objects. Pretty clearly, the answer is no, despite the absence of existence axioms on categories and functors, for clearly categories and topoi are recognized as structures in terms of which the vast bulk of mathematics is to be understood. So this is a very strange answer here. Say, well, in practice, so it's sort of a naturalized approach. Cannot deny the fact that categories are there, toposes are there in the practice of mathematics. So we're not denying that. Okay. And clearly we cannot eliminate them from that part. But what about the other sub-questions of the three? The nature of structures and what distinguishes mathematical structures from others. As remarkable as this is, one may doubt that it would be intelligible without prior background experience with concept based on set membership.
But the objection the category theory requires a theory is a very classical one. It's not.
Wait. Or experience with symbols representing numbers as objects. So what did you say about
The classical criticism of category theory.
Of course, that's what it basically
It's
what
not the
they're
first time that I heard that.
That's what
And
they're,
I have to say that I've never heard a very convincing reply to this question.
well, that's what.
I hope perhaps they. I will.
Today. That's what I'll attempt to do now. Concerning point 4, the existence of structures. Our main complaint leveled against category theory structuralism has been that it is underspecified. It should be pointed out, however, that text on category sometimes defer such questions to a background set theory. As you know, I mean, if you read a textbook on set theory, on category theory, sometimes in the very first pages, there are some options. The authors will say, well, if you press me and ask me what are these categories, so either I'll say, well, in the end, I can give you sets and show you how to do this in set theory, or you'll do like Barr and Wells. We don't give a damn, and we just know how to do it. And if you're interested in this, read another book. So it's sort of a different ways of answering, but they're sort of trying, well, some unweaving sometimes. And then this, but of course, this is not an option for the CT structuralists such as MacLean. I'm not sure MacLean was going there, but that's another issue. Who wants the framework to stand independently of set theory? And that's another, it has to be independent of set theory. When it comes to point 5, this is the access to these abstract structures. Reference and epistemic access to structures. Too little has been said for us to comment on. And I agree with this. I agree completely. Okay. And that's fair.
And when we say access, how do we know? How do we know things about
Exactly.
this? Okay.
Exactly.
Why would category theory be different from any other mathematics? Isn't it the same question for all of mathematics?
Get back to that. The answer is that we think that we might be able to construct a certain explanation of how we know sets. Some sort of narrative about this, if we have the standard picture of the cumulative hierarchy and stuff like that. But we don't have the same or a similar or an analogical picture for categories or whatever these abstract structures are. But I get your point, and I'll get back to that. Yes.
You can also do category theory and type theory, for instance. You can present them as generalized algebraic or essentially algebraic theories. I mean, there are other, there are other contexts, right? So this, like being tied to set theory being the meta theory inherently, I don't think. I'm not sure how this matches up with.
I agree. But they would not essentially agree immediately. Okay, because they would say, okay, we'll get that.
But isn't part of the point that they're saying if you're going to claim the category theory is foundational, then either set theory or type theory is presupposed, so it's not foundational. So category theory itself isn't foundational. The thing you have implemented in it might be, but it itself can't be.
In a sense, yes.
I mean, set theory is also not foundational. It's based on
Well-
first order logic, right?
Well, but together with, so the log, that's the first criteria. So you have to specify your logic. So first order logic, for instance.
Yeah,
for
but what Jonathan said about these type theories, they are also a logic.
Yeah,
So
then you would say,
category
okay.
theory plus set logic as
Yeah,
opposed to
that
set theory
could be
plus
an
first
answer.
order
That
logic.
could be an
Wait,
answer.
yeah. Let me finish my talk. Don't give the answer.
Time over beer.
Jean-Pierre, we can go.
Okay, last point. Now we move to the elementary theory of the category of sets or the category of categories as a foundation. So these were proposals made by Colin McCarty and others, Bill Lovier in the 60s, published 2 papers, and we go back to that. Okay, so let's look at those now. ATCS, the elementary theory of category of sets. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the axioms, how this works. Okay, so I will not go over that. So the good part, from a structuralist point of view, it is certainly noteworthy that this topos of sets treats its objects as defined only up to isomorphism, and that this provides structuralist insights by focusing on interrelations among the objects of this category, in accordance with the demands of arrows-only descriptions. I don't like that way of putting it, but okay, that's good. The bad part. Of the 7 groups of questions we've been putting to the various versions of mathematical structuralism, the 4th and 5th stand out as posing the greatest challenge. The 5th is the epistemological aspects. How do we access these objects? Again, this brings us back to this idea that somehow there's an idea of set or collection underlying the whole thing, whether you like it or not. Okay. The 4th, we'll get to that now. Just as in the case of element-based axiom systems like ZFC, there is either implicit or explicit commitment to an absolutely maximal universe of discourse or mathematics, counter to the Zurmelo-Putnam extendability principle, in accordance with which we've been talking as a desideratum on any structuralist account. This is all the more significant in that, as a foundational framework, ETCS is supposed to incorporate the development of all known mathematics. I don't know who said that.
Mhm.
I have no idea where they have taken this idea that the whole of mathematics can be done. That's really strange. It's just wrong. But anyway, so
Just a quick question. So is this a criticism of ETCS
Yes.
in particular, not
Yes.
about CT structuralism in general?
that's ETCS in particular. But come on, can't be serious. Really, where did you get that?
Can I ask what the Zurmelo-Putnam extendability principle is? I haven't heard of
It
it.
has to be as big as possible. And you have to extend it all the time.
Well, but there is no biggest possible.
Yeah.
No, but you can extend it always. I'm not quite sure how to frame it, but this is the idea that you can always add things on. Or either this or something is false.
Like this, like
thesis
everything that
maximum.
is doesn't lead to a
even,
contradiction exists.
Sorry?
Everything that doesn't lead to a contradiction exists.
Exists, right. That's one.
but this is even more clearly true for set theory.
Yeah.
Reduce all mathematics set theory, it means that the universe of mathematics is fixed a priori as a hierarchy structure.
But this idea that ETCS is the whole of mathematics is just
I don't, yeah.
incomprehensible to me. But
For set theory, this doesn't seem true because like the continuum hypothesis, for example, is never thought of as, well, it's independent. And you could add another cardinal consistently. So in that sense, it
depends who you talk to. If you talk to Wooded.
But even that's not the point. The point is whatever answer you give to the continuum hypothesis, any if you accept that the set theory is a foundation of mathematics, any mathematical object is a set. So then you do not know exactly what is a set because you cannot solve the continuum hypothesis. Okay. But in any case, the idea that whatever mathematical theory you want to recover within a set theory, you can identify its basic object as sets. So that is not the same thing. So to say that the universe is closed does not mean that you are able to answer to any question about this universe.
But so if you say everything that is consistent exists,
Sorry?
if you say everything that is consistent exists, you have to say everything that is consistent with what? Everything that is consistent with your theory exists. Okay, you could have sentences that are contradictory with each other, but that they are relatively consistent to your theory. So which one do you add?
Actually, for the negation of the action.
It's a question for him, not for me. Consistent.
So this Putnam cannot be just that. Cannot be just that everything that is consistent exists.
Well, doesn't matter, okay?
Okay.
It's just a point. Okay, the math part continued. Concerning point 5, epistemic access and reference to mathematical structures, there's a question whether ETCS is epistemically autonomous or whether understanding these axioms depends on a prior grasp of element-based set theory. Thus, it is a serious question, especially when it comes to issues of epistemic dependence, whether CT structuralism can stand autonomously in relation to element-based set. So this is a standard objection going back to Pfefferman, then John Bell, and then Hellman and Shapiro. It comes off. So there's also a very, very nice paper. I just opened a parenthesis because they refer to that paper in their book by Linebo and Pettigrew in 2011, where they look at topos theory and category theory. And it's a very, very nice paper. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. I'll give you the punchline. So if you don't want a punchline, you can walk out of the room and come back in 5 minutes. Of basically what they're trying to say. So they give 3 simple definitions of logical autonomy, conceptual autonomy, and what they call justificatory autonomy. So the first one, you can guess what they are. T1 has logical autonomy with respect to T2 if it is possible to formulate T1 without appealing to notions that belong to T2. T1 has conceptual autonomy with respect to T2 if it is possible to understand T1 without first understanding notions that belong to T2. And finally, T1 has justificatory autonomy with respect to T2 if it is possible to motivate and justify the claims of T1 without appealing to T2 or to justifications that belong to T2.
I never understood what notion mean in this sort of discourse.
What?
Notion. What is a notion? What does it mean that I formulated T1 without appealing to notions that belong
Well,
to
you can
T2?
define them on concept.
I use the notion of set, but either I accepted the axiomatic of set, so the axiom of set is a word. So I don't see the difference between the first criterion and the second.
Between logical and conceptual.
Yeah. I don't see the difference because I do not understand what a notion is, if not a way to understand the formalism.
Okay, well, I'm glad I'm
But
not.
in any case, that's a
I didn't write that. That's from Linebo. Okay. But what they say is this. They look at it very carefully, and then they conclude that the ETCS is logically autonomous. They conclude that it is conceptually autonomous. Okay, so good. But not clearly justified. One has, and they argue that one has to be an extreme naturalist, which means that in the end, your justification is just a practice of the mathematicians. That's the way mathematicians work. And that's I don't have any other justification than that. To claim that it is justified. And then they compare that with set theory. And then they say, the iterative conception of sets provides a better justifications for the standard conception than the one provided by the extreme naturalist. So if you're a topos theorist, you take ETCS and say, here's my take on this. And you say, oh, okay, that's fine. It doesn't depend on set theory, logically, conceptually, you can learn it. But how do you justify it? Do you have an independent picture of how it is built and that is available? which is sort of analogous to what we do in set theory, where we have these axioms and we have the cumulative hierarchy, and we can convince ourselves that the axioms are true of the cumulative hierarchy. And so works very well from a philosophical standpoint. How does it work for ATCS? And then they say it's not that clear. Okay? So that's the objection that they raise, and that Hellman and Shapiro actually take on and think it is correct. What about point 6 on allowing for a face value reading of ordinary mathematical discourse? Well, here the departure from ordinary discourse is even greater than it is with ZFC set theory, as arrows only formulations are that much further removed from ordinary discourse than the language of element-based sets and classes. Cheap shot.
What counts as ordinary discourse for mathematicians? That
Come on. Really? Regarding point 7, yes.
Could argue that elementhood is as a version of having morphism, stating that there is.
You could also argue that that's the way they learn mathematics, and if you were to learn it from you would find it more casual or easier to think in those terms than in the other. So which one is more ordinary? You're not clear. Okay, so that's on the table. So what about point 7, resolving paradoxes? ETCS can mimic the standard set theoretic resolution, but it does not appear to improve upon the latter connection with, e.g., ordinal representability of well orderings or with set representability of arbitrary collections of symbols. So even match. Okay, doesn't do better. In this sense, well, it's a good thing. Not sure it's a problem. Simply does not arise. It's not there. Okay, so as Colin McClody has proved, and he's written this paper, which appeared in 1993 in NUS, he actually argued about this. Use elementary theory of category of sets to say, well, Nashar's problem is not a problem. If you work in ETCS, you don't ask that question. Okay. To conclude,
Can I ask about the previous one, point 7? So what about Lever's fixed theorem? His rewriting of which he says at the beginning of the paper, he doesn't understand why anyone thinks this is a paradox.
right.
Because all it is there is no fixed point for
Right.
in a certain situation, there can't be a fixed point. Full stop.
Yep.
So no paradox.
Right.
That seems like a resolution of the paradox to say.
Yeah,
there
but
is-
that's not the one they have in mind. I mean, well, perhaps they do, or they don't know about that paper.
well, yeah,
Yeah, Russell's paradox, the Borelli 40 paradox.
right, right. I mean, that is sort of the resolution.
Yeah, I agree. But they don't mention that.
Yeah.
Whether they know it or not, I don't know.
But what does it mean for a mathematical theory to resolve a paradox? The only thing that they understand is that paradox does not arise within the theory itself.
Yeah, that's why I
right.
brought up Lever's
Lever's
theorem.
analysis.
It's a theorem that says there is no fixed point in this situation.
As far as I know, in category theory, there is no contradiction that is known, and so non-paradox that
No,
arise.
but if you were to ask something like the category of sets, so there clearly this is something like the set of all sets, which we know doesn't make sense. So what's the way around this? How do you solve that if you're in ETCS? If you have the collection that is too big for ETCS, how do you solve that? Something of that sort. Okay. All right. So conclusion. It seems a fair assessment to say that while axioms for a meta category of categories do make some progress toward providing answers to some of our 7 questions put to the various versions of mathematical structuralism, we are left still well short of satisfactory full answers, even to the first 4 questions. So, okay. Can do better. All right. End of the first part. Second part. What are we talking about? So what I'm trying to present here is, and it's not original for me, okay? I'll insist upon this, clarify that. is a mathematical framework that would capture, model, represent the nature of contemporary pure mathematics, notably its abstract structural aspects. In other words, what is the language in the universe of abstract mathematics? And now I emphasize the word abstract. If we were to go back to the quotes by Hellman and Shapiro, you ignore properties. They say abstract, but are not really pushing the idea of what it is to be abstract. Okay, because they sort of build in the idea that a structure is abstract, which is something that I find bizarre, but perhaps you can argue for that. But I want to insist on the abstract nature. After all, we all talk about abstract algebra. Something different from what was done before. And a lot of people, and I should do a survey here, when I ask mathematicians, do you think that there are degrees of abstractions? That's the answer I always get. Of course.
Can you repeat the question?
Do you believe that there are degrees of abstraction?
More than one
There are
degree.
things that are more abstract than others. Concepts that are more abstract than others. Well, usually say, yeah, sure. I mean, and I can test your intuitions on this. Do you think that the concept of topological space is more abstract than the concept of metric space? No, okay.
About the same.
That the concept of a locale is more abstract than the concept of a metric space. Yeah. Okay. All right. So
That's more abstract mean here that one falls into the definition
you
of the
tell
other.
me, okay, but you all go.
I mean, if
The narrative.
the
That's
notion
not-
of commutative ring is more abstract than the notion of the ring of the integers, in the sense that one falls into the definition of the other.
Well, in this,
One is an instance of
I
the
didn't
other.
tell you what sense you.
But other than that, I don't understand what more abstract means.
No, but I think the point is that mathematicians talk to each other.
You spontaneously say this is more. And I could tell
It's
you
not a technical point.
quotes from textbooks that are coming from great mathematicians to just say it without thinking about it. It's just this is more abstract.
But it's relative to the language you're most comfortable with, right?
I don't know. Okay, don't want to go there, but spontaneously, something that just like computer scientists actually learn this through going through the different things. It's just, one of my sons is going through computer science. He just says this is more abstract than that. This language is more abstract than this one. What are you talking about? But it's like, yeah, it's just more abstract. This is more
But it's not another way to say that it's more general.
more complex, more general. It's a different. Can he be more abstract and
Reducible to, sometimes people use that in computer science, right?
Yeah.
I see it more as like a narrative thing, like imagining like people start off and they're talking about like I have 5 rocks, and it's like it has that unit attached to it, so it's a concrete thing. And then eventually you start to see patterns, like 5 rocks behaves the same way as 5 sticks. So you can abstract and start talking about numbers now that sort of contain meaning that applies to a lot of things. And then maybe you abstract from that to talk about like whatever algebraic structures on things are. So I always see it as relative to like a
Piaget has written many articles on that kind of stuff in children. Now, of course, we can expand on this and explore that. But mathematicians, some spontaneously without thinking, and when you think of the history of mathematics in the 20th century, it's a rising abstraction.
Do you think
Determines-
that when mathematicians say abstract, that's something positive or something negative?
Depends who you talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Right, but that's already revealing, right? So abstract can even in math be negative. It has
It is.
a negative
Absolutely.
connotation, right?
Abstract nonsense.
You know what?
No, but that was meant positively.
That's true. That's true. But there are, I mean, if you read, for instance, if you read, let's say a few words about that, Bourbaki, okay, and he, in some of his papers, will say there's a great resistance to the way we do mathematics.
Mhm.
And the way they do it is to use all the abstract structures they can to solve problems. Okay, and they were aware of that. Actually, they won. Okay, because all the curriculum of the universities changed after in the 60s, following the way they were doing it. Nonetheless, mathematicians even nowadays will say this was a mistake, and this is really wrong. And we'll get that. Okay, so I want a mathematical framework that will answer these questions by Hellman and Shapiro. I want a language, I want a universe, and I want an explanation of how one responds to the other. And I also want, that's the bonus, I want to be able to relate that to the actual mathematical framework they are used to and they like, and that mathematicians are like also. I don't want to just throw it away. Okay? The question is, what should we use in mathematics? And that's good. It goes back, of course, to Hilbert, who wanted to restrict the methods of the mathematics, but afterwards people tried, Tarski, Robinson, and the others expanded the methods that were allowed in mathematics, and the word disappeared from the usage, but it's still what it is still relevant, and it describes something. Notice that it seems as if Hellman and Shapiro want a specific logic. And what is your logic in structuralism? Is it first order logic, second order logic, higher order logic, or something like that? And you have to specify the ones you want to. I don't want to go there. I want a flexible format. I will use first order logic, but I want a format in which I will be able to extend it to second order logic, higher order logic, generalized quantifiers, infinitary logic, and stuff like that. Type theory. So the framework has to be very flexible. Categories can be used in the mathematical framework, as Lavier taught us very early on. And so can pure regular sets. I need them. Okay, if I want to translate one thing into another, why not? But the introduction of categories should somehow be natural and intuitive. So it's not pragmatic motivation. So I'll use categories because they're very useful. I ought to have some story. That's why I'm talking about a narrative as to why categories arise naturally in the picture. It has to be convincing. It has to be necessary, so to speak. All right. Pause. This is from Benasharaf's paper. So if you read the paper in 1965, there are two quotes. This one and one from Frege. So I'll read this. The attention of the mathematician focuses primarily upon mathematical structure, and his intellectual delight arises in part from seeing that a given theory exhibits such and such a structure, from seeing how one structure is modeled in another, or in exhibiting some new structure and showing how it relates to previously studied ones. It's a little short. I mean, there's much more that you can do when you realize that there is a structure in your setup that you didn't see before. For instance, if you're working in an algebraic problem and you realize there's a topological structure at work that you didn't identify before, and suddenly you have a different view of the problem and the methods that you can use. So that's one thing. But the mathematician is satisfied so long as he has some entities or objects or sets or numbers or functions or spaces or points to work with, and he does not inquire into the inner character or ontological status. Yes.
I have a question. Could I replace their structure by language without changing the meaning?
Good question. If your language has signatures and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think of
formal
mathematics as
language.
having lots of different languages,
Yeah.
and the languages are kind of adapted to the structure
Yeah, we can do that.
in question.
Yeah, DSLs. DSLs.
Yeah.
Who is at this airport?
That's been us.
That's not Beneshev. It is in Beneshev's paper. That's the opening quote.
Marquis or Dedekind.
And then the second part, the same part. The philosophical logician, on the other hand, is more sensitive to matters of ontology and will be especially interested in the kind or kinds of entities there are actually. He will not be satisfied with being told merely that such and such entities exhibit such and such a mathematical structure. He will wish to inquire more deeply into what these entities are, how they relate to other entities, blah, blah, blah. Also, he will wish to ask whether the entity dealt with is sui generis or whether it is in some sense reducible to or constructible in terms of other, perhaps more fundamental entities. So this is from Martin book, quoted by Beneshev. Now, what strikes me, I don't know whether some of you have seen, when we talk about structuralism, there's a distinction that is sometimes put on the table between methodological structuralism and philosophical studies. And when we quote that, we go back to a paper by Reck and another guy from 2000, where they explicitly introduce this. But this is exactly what they're doing. So a lot of philosophers will say, well, we don't care about the first part, the methodological structuralism. What we really care about is this part. Okay? Whether that is justified or not is a question in itself. Okay, but it is in the literature. But it is ironic that Beneshev himself uses that quote in the opening part of his paper. And then there's a quote from Craig that follows from this. Okay, so I want to make a distinction. I don't want to put all the possible structure in the same bag. When, historically at least, structures appeared, well, the first abstract structure that really appeared on the scene is the notion of group. Okay, at the end of the 19th century. That's the first one that was really identified, used as such. And then rings, fields, partially ordered sets, lattices, attributed lattices, vector spaces, earlier also modules, Hilbert spaces, Banach spaces, metric spaces, topological spaces, and so on. So this is one class of structures that we all learned and like as undergraduates in pure mathematics. It is also basically the content of Bourbecky's project when he started in 1939 to write and publish papers. And it is also what most people will, like Landbeck, when he was talking about doing mathematics in a topos, that's what he had in mind. You can do classical, ordinary mathematics in ETCS. You can do that. But there's more. And the more came afterwards. Homotopy theory, category theory, homological algebra, sheaf theory. They just appeared in 1950s, and around that time. They were not in Bourbecky's mind at all. And they were not taught to undergraduates. Okay, that came afterwards. Nowadays, things are shifting. But the shift and the lines are not so clear. How should we teach these things? Should we start with categories and then introduce groups and rings? Or should we follow the historical pattern with groups and rings and fields and then categories, like people did in the 70s, like McLean and all the schools? Okay. Yes?
I mean, there's a kind of proposal or a direction to, if you look at homotopy theory, to do this in setting like homotopy type theory, some homotopy invariant system where you don't even, or some kind of other synthetic language where you don't even talk about topological spaces.
Yeah, you just start from scratch.
Matter for the kind of results that you're interested
in. Yeah. And for instance, if you look at Colin McClarty's book, Elementary Toposes, Elementary Categories and Toposes, Le Pari in French. The bet was that you could do it in such a way that it would be easy from elementary language, from the language itself. If you've tried that, and I have, it's not easy for almost all students, but that's another thing. So here's the thing. Let's start a try or use a very simple example. So a group is usually presented as a set together with a binary operation n, blah, 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 with a numeric operation, as you know in first order logic. But suppose I was also, you will to read something like this in a textbook. Okay, suppose you read a textbook and then you read this. Let G be the Klein 4 group, and let G be this set. You would say, there's something wrong here. I know what the Klein 4 group is. Why would G be this particular set? Something bizarre. Who wrote this text? Yeah, you've never seen this. And it's as if the language of set theory of the Z is just too much.
But I don't understand this criticism at all. This is clearly at the wrong level of abstraction. But you can use ZF without ever writing that. So it's not a criticism of ZF as far
But
as I understand.
allows you to write it.
Yeah, but why not? Like why is the language that restricts me from saying things that I don't even want to say? Why is that a good thing?
I agree with you that in some sense, it is a good thing that we can write some things like that. Okay, for instance, it's a good thing that we can actually write the ordinals and say this is a model of natural numbers.
Yeah.
That's
It's interesting remark.
Absolutely, I agree. But I'm not saying that's the problem.
No, but why is it a problem that a language allows us to say things I don't want to say?
I would like to have a language that reflects the nature of what we're talking about here. And we all know that when we talk about the Klein 4 group, there's one thing that we don't talk about is this, it is a specific set with the specific elements. You're able to, but if I were to insist to say that the Klein 4 group then has properties related to that particular set, then you would say, wait, you're not doing mathematics in the right way. And what is at work here is that we know that we're working up towards something.
But do you want a language that prevents mathematicians from doing mathematics in the wrong way? Like mathematicians know how to do mathematics.
But I would like to have a language that reflects the nature of the fact that G, the Klein 4 group, is what I take to be an abstract group. And that's its underlying set. But it doesn't have to be that. Because then if I really believe that it is that particular set, I will start saying things about the Klein 4 group that to you will seem rather bizarre. And even probably to others, nonsensical. And you're telling me, well, do you want to prevent that? I said, well, yes.
It seems like almost like a straw man argument, as if you want to, you kind of want to change the language of mathematics to prevent mathematicians from doing something they never would do anyway.
Well, that's right. But I want a language that will reflect what they do.
Model their behavior.
That's what metamathematics does. Okay, it's an analysis of how.
But we also know from mathematics that if we restrict the language in such a way that we can only say things that we really want to say, that we then saying these things becomes much harder.
It could be.
Yes. Like for example, if I want all computable functions. Right. So if I want all total computable functions, I have to allow to write non-terminating functions as well.
Right.
There is no language for just. Right. And so I think that something similar is going to happen here as well. Right. So if you tailor the language too much, you make it too difficult. Or like dependent type theory. It's just so much harder to write programs in dependent type theory than just in Haskell.
But that's precisely where I'm going.
Okay, I'm curious.
I mean, sort of coming from like multiple type theory, I think about things like higher category theory. I mean, I think there are some maybe even more pointed or like less clear examples to this. Like even if you just go to classical category theory, like good versus evil category theory, this kind of thing, and this becomes even more visible in like talking about what's a good level of abstraction for higher category theory and stuff like that. But for me, this is all just actually speaking in favor of caring about having a good DSL for it. And that's of course a very relative thing. So
A good what? ESO.
to my specific language.
DSO. Okay.
Yeah, but these foundations, set theoretic foundations is one language for everything.
Yeah, well, that's
It's a completely different motivation than it is.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, that's.
but the domain is as wide as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you mean by let G be the client for group? What do you mean
It's
by that?
Well, you didn't say that. That should be the example.
But before I have said many other things. For example, before I have said that there is a group like Z2 times Z2, and this group has certain properties, and these properties can characterize this group up to isomorphism. And from now on, when I say the client group, I'm going to say anything that is isomorphic to this particular. That's how I would present it.
Will anybody agree with that? That's one way.
But something.
No, I think this is coherent with the fact that I have defined a group to be a particular set with a particular structure. Otherwise, I would be doing things. I wouldn't be precise.
Okay, but this is the.
I was just gonna say that I think the point of doing it this way is that we don't have to say all of that and then take like an equivalence class of representatives. Like we have a way we do math, and we want to create a system that complements that instead of using a system. Like we can obviously do math in set theory. We have been doing that for a while, but the question is, can we do math in a system that aligns more closely with how we want to do it?
The problem to me is that I think that this is speaking about two different things. You could say,
I was thinking about two different things.
yeah, but if you're saying the client for group is a group in which you have 4 elements, and all of them are of order 2 except for the neutral element.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I could
Then-
also
then
write
you
it
have
the
not
table
defined-
down.
you
Also
have-
write the table.
You have not defined the 4 client group. You have defined a lot of groups that fall under the category. This is one of the 4 clients. So there is no so the client for group is not a thing.
It is abstract. And we know it through representations.
Okay, then it's perfectly fine to say let's take G one of those client for groups, and moreover, I want
I think that the point is just the following: what make a group a claim for group is not the nature of the element of the set, but are the relation to establish between.
And then I can and then there
So nothing forbid you to say that these are the 4 elements of the set. But the problem is whether when you establish a relation, you refer or you not refer to the particular nature of this object. If by establishing a relation, you use the fact that it is the empty set, the singleton empty set, etc., so you are not defining the claim group, you're defining possibly particular.
I'm defining a particular.
But if you say, okay, I take this to be my element, and then I establish the relation between them in totally independence of the particular nature of these elements. So simply, I am doing something useless, but I'm not doing something
But
wrong.
maybe it's not useless. Maybe I want my elements to be these particular ones because I want to compare that with some other group. And then why should that be useless? Why would this be useless? I want to say that. So I want to be able to say that. It's not like Alex criticism that mathematician would never be interested in say that. So why should we forbid something that?
No, but in
mathematicians are
this
not?
case, what you should have written is and let G an instance of the claim.
And this is the precise sentence
of it.
that this.
So we can
this
perfectly have an
example.
instance of the claim for group that is made by the set.
I agree, except that someone, if you were to meet someone
Yes.
who would insist that, no, I really mean that it's not an instance, it is that set.
Then I would say, okay, then that's completely fine. This is your definition. for the time being, I'm going to agree that this is the definition that we're going to be
You're very
using.
nice.
And then later on,
Because you would say, no, wait, there's something wrong here, because the abstract character of the Klein foregroup makes it that this is one instance of the Klein foregroup,
Yeah.
perhaps. And there are others, and they are very.
yeah, but I think this will be the same as me insisting 5 minutes ago that the Klein group is Z2 times Z2, and then any other thing is isomorphic to that. I also call it one of the instances of the Klein group.
That's one of the issues.
So
That's the
because
important.
I want to have this privilege, I will also admit the privilege on
It
that.
mixes the Von Neumann and Zermello ordinals. Is there any significance to that?
No,
No.
no, I just mixed it.
All right.
There was no intention, yeah, except for.
I mean,
Appreciate it.
I'm just thinking, I mean, certainly some people were thinking of client foregroup before there's even the notion of group, say. And maybe they didn't realize that there was some abstraction that this happens to instantiate, but you know, they're interested in these, you know, transformations of regular figures. And so the idea that it has to be an instantiation of like the group concept is, I could see how that favors the most general formulation. So,
It does, but. The pure.
I mean, surely we were thinking about the same thing that, you know, people modern group definition thinking about. We would agree on what we're thinking.
I'm sure I'm following, because
Yeah.
for instance,
I think of the Klein foregroup as a particular equational theory. It's just a very narrow one.
okay,
And we can agree on, you know, the multiplication table.
right. And not seeing that it is a group, for instance.
Yeah.
Okay.
We agree we're thinking about this particular equational theory. And I was not sure what you would say about that.
I'm not sure what I would say about that, because the fact is, I'm trying to reflect the fact that we're dealing with abstract concepts here. That's the point. So it's trying to bring me lore, saying, well, there are things before that, perhaps, in the concept. I'm trying to figure out a way of talking about these abstract concepts.
Once the abstraction is in mind.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to capture.
So there are levels of abstraction, and these are mismatching levels. Of
Right.
abstraction. Okay.
Right. That would be one way of putting it. But we deal with this every day, and not only in math, but in our daily lives. And I'll come back. Yes.
So, for example, in we know what is a category with products.
Yeah.
Right. And then any product would be a product of two objects of the category. Okay, that's okay, right? But sometimes for certain applications, you need to make a choice.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So this is exactly the same.
I'm
Right.
not saying that all of mathematics is abstract mathematics. Okay, let's be clear. Okay? But there's a large part of it that I'd like to understand and capture. All right. So this is really Mackay's approach. So all sets have your elements. And they're bare.
What is bare? I do not understand the English.
Atomic.
Exactly, atomic, that's another way of saying, in ZF, the only set that is atomic is the empty set. The impure regular sets that we know. And you can add atomic,
ZMC
so there are
is
things that are not,
your element and your element is there.
there are not, so there are sets with things that are not sets.
And
You cannot
and you
break-
don't want
you
to say
cannot-
any more about them.
Exactly. Exactly. So for instance, if I want to talk about the product in this universe, I cannot say that. Because then I have to rely on a definition of an ordered pair, which is a set, so blah, blah, blah. So what do? We do category theory. Right? That's how we do it. If we have sets with your elements, the product is defined by the universal property. course, they're instantiated, but all kinds of these sets with perhaps have not Euro elements. But in my universe, all sets have Euro elements.
So you mean ordered pair defined in the usual,
In the usual
Wait,
set theoretical.
meaning in the set
Kurakov
theoretic,
theory,
yeah.
Okay. Not clear?
Yep.
Then, all the sets have an internal equality relation. Okay, in that set, they have a structure. There's a relation. Okay, so I treat them as a structure, an abstract structure. It is possible to say, given two U elements in a given set, whether they are equal or not. So it's sort of like a type. You can think of them like that with these U elements, and there's a relation quality for each thing. Okay, so there's no, this is important, there's no universal identity relation. So, in particular, there is no equality relation between such sets. There's no axiom of extensionality. Okay, so this
I
is
do not
basic.
understand that.
Well, it's a different set theory. We're going to construct a set theory that is radically different from ZF.
Is that an empty set?
It will be a terminal object and there will be an initial object.
I do not understand what are you doing, what you are doing.
I'm trying to build a different picture of sets that is radically different from a regular or pure sets. And I'm trying to see whether it makes sense to think of sets this way. And in fact, in a way, it's more obvious to think about set that way than regular sets. And if you think of sets when you're in high school, usually it's quite easy to think about this ball with points in it.
and the points aren't sets.
And the points aren't sets. And we all have this problem when we teach set theory, ZF set theory to students, the difference between subsets and being an element of. We should like, at first students are really confused, what's the difference, how, and some students never get it. Sort of a test whether they can do math or not. But here it's very different. I'm not using there's no epsilon belongs to, didn't say that. Okay, all I'm saying, there's no extensionality.
So
I'm just building it. There will be a language in a minute. Okay.
yeah, but so I just want to ask, so when you say all the sets have Ur elements, you mean they have nothing but Ur?
Exactly. Well, except for the empty set.
Right, well, no, it can have none.
It is, yeah.
It may have none,
Yeah.
but whatever it has, those things are
Right.
atomic.
Exactly.
So there is no iterated concept here of set,
No,
not directly.
not directly, but there will be operations of them. And I can always, well, we'll get to them if you want.
So why you cannot write the second, because we are using it. So I do not understand the task. Thus we cannot write. Why we
Because-
cannot write it?
It's only because A comma B is in the usual way. It's an iterated set.
Right.
It's a set of other things.
It's not taking it as a primitive notion
It's
in
not
the
a- it's
usual
not a
set
top.
theory. It's defined as being the set of A and a set of A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a set with a structure in it. It's not a U element. Okay, so my ordered pairs are not U elements. But I have to have a set that will be the product. It will contain only U elements. How do you deal with that?
Okay,
You do
okay,
category
okay.
theory. Okay, so that's how we do it.
But if we accept the idea that ZFC has one U element, so
But then we generate all the other sets with this element.
yeah,
And we get this picture of,
is what we do.
yeah,
Yeah, but
that's how we do it. That's how John Neumann taught it to do.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's a different theory of sets in which you don't have that. They're not pure. All the sets have U elements and only U elements.
How many? Oh,
Well, we have axioms.
Hmm.
Okay?
Mhm.
I won't present you all the axioms, but of course, I can give you really what it'll amount to. You'll get ATCS basically,
Hmm.
written in a different way. But you'll basically get the same thing, but written in a different language. So given primitive notion, so this is one thing that I don't know how, perhaps there is a narrative here. But I need a notion of function between these sets with U elements. So I take that as primitive. So they ask me, what is your primitive notion? Well, I'll be more precise in a minute, but that will have to be one of the primitive notions. Given the notion of function, it is possible to obtain an identity relation for abstract sets. They made the notion of isomorphism in the regular way. So I will have to be able to define that in the language. And you see where I'm going. Okay? Thus, there is no universal identity. I said that in the logic. Identity is the derived notion. And I will start with first order logic like Mackay does. But of course, the framework is really flexible. You can have a fragment if you want, coherent logic. You can go to higher dimensional or second order logic, infinitarial logic. The thing will have to will work. Okay? And you want that. Why do you want that? Because when you have a stronger logic, you can express more things. Why would we restrict yourself to first order logic? It's nice properties, but if you need more,
Yes.
you have more.
But what is relevant in your example is that your first order logic, then you go second order logic, you can take as an extension of first order logic. Then you go dependent type, you can take as an extension.
But I
And
would,
you take Eiger logic is still an extension. So you take modern logic is still an extension. But what about, for example, paraconsistent logic? That is not an extension of first order logic.
I don't
So
have,
you want what you want, or you
No.
want only extension?
I have extension of first order.
You want extension of first order?
Yeah, well, I would start with regular logic, coherent logic. first
Okay.
logic. Okay. It's a type theory, okay? So it's dependent types. So I have sets. That's the basic type, primitive notion. I declare that X is a set, and it's not a sentence, okay? It's a declaration. It's in computer science, obvious. So I cannot write not X is a set. This is meaningless in the language, okay? I can write something like this for all X that are set and for all X that are element of X. So this is a new type. There is an E that is of type equality X, and that is true. This is just reflexivity of equality in the set X. So I can write down axioms for this relation in these sets, saying that the relation is reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. That is an identity. This is a type. And now my universe comprises types. The basic one is these sets, okay? But now there are dependent. The variables depend on the sets, and I go on like this. Here's the signature of the language. It can be presented also as a category with a little nice diagram. It's a finite thing. So basically, so there's a hierarchy here, and I start from top, and I go down, and I introduce new types. And their dependencies are stipulated by this order. So the basic type is set, variable X. Then the type, the elements of X is a dependent type because it depends on the variable S. Big X. Yes.
So how do I understand a double colon?
It's just a way to make sure that you don't confuse the
Scope.
I introduce a new type that way. So when I have a double column, this is a new type now, depending on the first one. Okay. So now if I have sets X and Y, I introduce a new type, which are the arrows or the maps from X to Y, dependence on X to Y. Then I go down, if X is a set, X and Y are elements of X. Then the equality is, there's a witness now that I introduce of the equality. This is a new type. And then the last one is the more complicated one. You were right, Alex, it's more complicated, for sure. X and Y are set, F is a map depending on X, Y, X is an element dependent on X, and Y is an element depending on big Y. Then there's a witness in this new type, the application of F from X to Y, F of Y to X gives me Y. So this is a complicated thing. Of course, once you have that, you can introduce abbreviation for the way you write them, and can you write sentences in the usual way and unpack everything in the standard way. But underlying this is a basic ontological difference. Now the universe is made up of different things. Now I can add,
Can you explain me what is the application here? It's not clear.
it's just f computed on x gives me y. F is a function. F applies to x gives me y is equal to y.
So it's the composition of function.
It's not a composition, it's just the application of f on big X. It gives you the elements.
You will need then to say more things, right?
Of course, yes.
Mhm.
So now I won't, there's the interest of time because I don't have until 8 o'clock. Now we start adding axioms. And the basic axioms we start with are the ones that will give us what Michael calls the minimal theory of abstract sets. And the minimal theory of abstract sets simply states, and there are 7 axioms for this, that it is that, and these are the axioms for a category. This is the basic thing. And then, of course, you can add other axioms, but right there, if I finish there, I can actually say things that are interesting in that language. Okay. So what I just said, the minimal theory says that functions compose, the identity function exists, composition is associated, the identity functions are neutral elements with respect to composition, Well, so it's just the basic axioms for they form a category. But I didn't say that. Okay, I just told you the properties of the structure. That you have these sets, these functions, you can apply, you have the identity functions, you can compose. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying more than this. This is an important part. Okay, and the notion of isomorphism is also easy to define. And here's the important thing. And that's the reason why the whole thing was built. Okay, you can prove by induction on the formulas of the language that for any formula phi of x over the signature that I've given you, with the single free set variable x, we have that if x has the property phi and y is isomorphic to x, then y has the property phi. In other words, all of the isomorphic properties can be proved. So your language will allow you to express up to isomorphism only. But all the properties that are invariant under isomorphism will be in the language.
So I do not understand what is this Px. So this is, I
Phi-x
understand
is
the
just
first order logic, but it's not in your signature.
Language
Yes,
that
but it's not in
defines-
your signature. But that's, I understand because I know first order logic. So I
Well, it
understand
is
the
first order
Px.
logic. I didn't say that.
Ah,
Sorry.
you accept the first order logic.
It is.
Ah, okay.
I have the signature. I have the usual.
Signature of first order logic is there.
connectives, Connectives and modifiers.
Okay.
The signatures can be more complicated.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And this interesting thing that Michael has shown is that I can introduce axioms, for instance, for groups, but in the categorical way. That is, you're familiar with this, to take a group object with a diagram and everything in this language. Now, these are more axioms in the language. And now you can prove that the same thing will hold for these guys. In other words, you are talking about groups, quadgroups, and nothing else. They have an underlying set, a few elements, no nature. I mean, there's nothing there that you can actually deal with. But all the properties that you can actually write will be the properties that are invariant on the ice.
So let me understand what you are doing. Because now I have to follow you locally, but still do not follow you globally, but perhaps I have an idea what you are doing as well. You are telling me what is that really we need about set in order to make category theory. It's not true that we need ZFC. We need some notion of set. This notion of set is different and much weaker than ZFC.
It's not weak.
It's not weaker. No. But we need we do not need ZFC. So you disagree to the habitual criticism that say in order to make category theory you need ZFC, but you do not disagree with the usual critics that say in order to make category theory, you need a theory of set. And now you are establishing what is the theory of set that you need in order to make properly category theory. That's what you are doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Going back to like the 8 criteria.
Right.
The one about asserting existence of things. Like in ZFC, they say like, oh, there is an empty set, like that's an object. You can
Yep.
work.
I didn't-
One of the axioms is there's
Oh.
a terminal object.
There will be, yes. I
Yeah.
will give you all the X. So this is the basic thing, but already there, I have this thing that I can prove, or I can actually define groups with this little tiny theory. But of course, I want more. And I will add axioms saying that there's an additional object, a terminal object, there's an infinite object, a natural number object, and the operations that I will need in that sense. So basically, these are the same axioms as in TCS, but in that language. Okay, so I have that. Now, okay, so we can do more. And in fact, we can go, as I said, groups, rings, lattices, stuff like that. All you do in the undergraduate work, these structures, well, that can be done here, and it will satisfy. You know, up to us, yes.
So just a question about this theorem that you have. So is it something that holds for the minimal theory or when
It
you?
holds for the minimal theory, and then when I add things, it will holds also.
Okay,
And that's the whole thing.
is there
And the flexibility is that I want to do it for other signatures.
right, do you have a criteria for what kind of extensions would preserve that property and what kind of extensions would not?
I don't know. That's a good question.
So what the question?
Well, but you can tell what kind of theory, once you start adding axioms, would preserve this property, that everything you can prove about something is also true about something that's more.
But there may be there, I mean, if it's in folds, then it can be done, but do you have a specific criteria? I don't know. Okay, now, here's another very important point. Now, consider the totality of these sets. So, why? I don't have an equality relation between them. And a set in this framework is something with an equality relation. So I have to.
Identity, you mean?
I have to use a new type. It is a category.
This is not unlike Martin Lewis type theory.
Exactly. It is inspired by Martin Lewis type 2. So, but you have a new ontology here at work. Okay. So suddenly the totality of these sets is a new type. It's a category. And now I need a new language with a new signature for categories.
And now you
that can
have
be
only
done.
one category, the
So
category of sets.
that's one category. But now I want to talk about categories. And now if, for instance, I want to say my groups, if I take the totality of groups in the category of sets, it's a category also. And so on and so forth. So I have all kinds of
So
categories.
this is not one category, it is the super category.
No, well, it has this privileged role, but we know that. And the category of sets in category theory is very important. No one will deny that. So all the examples of Grothendieck topuses are over sets. So I need something like that to work. Now I have a new language and a new signature and a new criterion of identity. That's another thing. No, it's not something that this is the beautiful part of his theory. If you look at it, then you have to see it from the signature, how the criterion of identity will emerge. And lo and behold, it gives you equivalence of categories, which is a different criterion of identity. So now, levels of abstraction. Well, this is interesting. Perhaps things that are up to isomorphism are a same level of abstraction, things that are at the level of equivalences are a different level of abstraction. I don't know. How would you clarify that? But this is what we have. Okay, this is not entirely new, in fact. This basically, the first part is basically what Bourbaki was trying to do in 1940s and 50s. And they did not succeed. There were various reasons why they did not succeed, but they basically had that idea that they wanted abstract structures, and abstract structures, what they had to do is that if you had two structures that are isomorphic, they should satisfy the same theorems. So what they did is they tried to build in this idea is if you have a theory about these structures, you should plug it in the idea that the theorems that you will have be able to derive will have to be up to isomorphisms. They have this notion of transportation of structure, but they tried to build it in. The problem they had is that they didn't have categories. Categories just showed up at some point, and then everything just fell apart. Now Michael has discovered that and said, well, now we have the tools to reconstruct this in a systematic manner. Lo and behold, it can be done in categorical logic. So how are we doing?
So you said you kind of automatically get equivalence between categories.
Automatically,
opposed to
you
isomorphism
have
of
to work the language, and there's a mechanism.
And if you go higher up, you
Yeah.
need to put in
By
original
equivalent,
effort at each step you go up, or is there a general principle of how to go up?
there's no, you have to signature, if you go to two categories, then you have signature for two categories, and then you have by equivalence.
Yeah, and at each step you need to
Yep.
kind of see how to
Yep.
build the next step. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So how are we doing? Primitive and background logic. Well, I did say we can do first order logic to start with and make sense. But if we want to go and have more expressive power in your language,
In fact, in the story, your logic is higher logic.
sorry,
Is high order logic.
it's not a higher order logic. It's really a first order.
Yes, but then
Logic.
you,
I can, if I want.
when
to.
you have higher logic, nobody forbid you to use the first order logic only. If
No.
you are in higher logic, you can prove a lot of theorem
Yes, you can
in
prove if
first
you
order
want,
logic.
but the basic point is that the theorem that I proved for the first order.
Only
logic,
require first order logic.
I can extend it to
Okay.
other logics. Okay, that's the main point. That's the basic idea. It doesn't have to be stuck with this system. Okay, this is flexibility that I have, that I can prove this.
But even at this sort of first level, it's just first order logic, but it's got it's dependent signatures or dependent sources.
Absolutely.
So it does have high order in it, but at the level of the
Signature and
level of
not the
structure.
machinery. So some axioms are structurals, like the ones for, it says that the functions compose and stuff like that. I didn't show you the axioms that state the existence of, but I could have done that. So I do have axioms that assert the existence of certain objects in that universe. So there's no ambiguity there. Absolutist. So this idea of whether you can go up and up or whether there's a maximal, well,
You said all sets.
up for grabs.
You said all sets form a category.
Yes.
So you're talking about all sets?
Categories. And then I have two categories and I have three categories and I have, I go up.
Mm.
And the question is, do I end at some point? So Michael believes that you end at omega categories. And the omega categories of all omega categories is an omega category. That's his thing. Okay, that's what he's betting on. Whether that makes sense or not, I'll leave you to decide. Otherwise,
He thinks
so he has this notion,
fixes.
yes, he has this notion of there's a fixed point. He has this notion of an omega category. Now, if you look at the omega category of all omega categories, it is itself an omega category.
That's what he's hoping for.
Right. And he has written a paper where he defines these things and he tries to prove it. Whether that has succeeded or not, no one has reacted. It's an open question. Yes.
I mean, there are certainly definitions or models of like infinity categories where this is true.
Okay.
So it's more recent to merge this with false-like languages, but there have been some very recent developments to kind of make this match with the framework that you typically need to talk about higher categories in a structured and variant way. So,
Right.
um,
Send me the reference.
sure.
Thanks. No elimination of structures, of course. Okay, we're not trying to reduce them to something else. They're there in the language. They're types. So that's clear. But is there a rich hierarchy of abstract structures based on abstract sets? And we go on like this, as I said. 5. Okay, epistemic access. Now, this is a completely different talk. I'll say one thing. It's not that different from all the objects that we're familiar with. For instance, perhaps I should take another example. Name a novel.
Sorry?
Name a novel.
Ulysses.
Ulysses. Well, oh, come on.
Sorry. 100 years of solitude.
That's an interesting one. I don't want to go there. That's a more complicated. This is if I wanted to avoid a complicated example. That's a complicated example. A more recent novel that you love and read and
Name, I have to name you a
novel. Yeah.
Il Gattopardo.
Who?
It's the best novel of the 20th century.
Which is?
Gattopardo by Tomasi Lampedusa.
I don't know. Has it been the class?
Okay, the Master and Margaret. The Master and Margaret.
Okay, so fix that. So where is it? The novel. What is it? Its ontological status. It's certainly not one copy.
Not good. It's not a good.
Why not?
No, because this is an interesting notion by Charles Parsons. That there are two sorts of abstract objects. There are abstract objects in the sense of groups, for example. There are abstract objects like quasi-empirical. A novel is a quasi-empirical. The property of a novel as an abstract group depends on a particular object that is there, that is something that is written once. So it is a quasi-empirical abstract object, not all the objects are quasi-empirical.
Well, but it's closed. I mean,
No,
but you can look.
Quasi-empirical objects are very relevant objects.
I
There are
agree.
a lot of
I'm not
mathematical
saying-
objects of
I'm not-
quasi-empirical.
Wait.
That not all mathematical objects are quasi-empirical.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there is a similarity in the way we think about these things. Okay, I'm not saying that mathematics are quasi-empirical or that quasi-empirical are not worth it. But if you think about the ontological status of a novel or a musical piece, okay, Schubert's 14th String Quartet,
Or a phoneme. The most clear example is a phoneme.
okay. And it has to be represented. It has to be either it is physical or in the case of a group, an abstract group, you have this particular way of writing it. Well, we access them through their representation. So that's the start of the answer. Okay. But it takes very seriously the idea that they are abstract and that it means that it has representation. So Hellman and Shapiro, remember, they just said, well, they're like universals, except that they talk about systems. This is right. Okay, in the sense that universals, the basic properties that they have is that they're exemplified by different objects. This is what is going on here, and it has to be taken seriously if we want to answer that particular point. 6, face value of mathematical statements. Yes, we take them at face value, literally. And we can generalize Tarski's definition of truth for the language I've given you. Michael has shown how to do it, and we just treat them like any other logical language interpreter in what way we want to interpret them. We have a specific interpretation of
But
the
sorry,
structure.
what does it mean 3 plus 5 equal 8 at face?
Well, you have to tell me more than that.
No, but I tell you that. So it means that if we have a face value, we mean that, so you need to have a definition of 3 and for an A.
I have these, if you
Within
press me,
the-
you have to press.
So
me.
you define a natural number.
But in this particular,
okay.
in this particular category, but this particular topos, but if you switch to another one, then you'll have. a
Okay,
different-
okay, this I may see what I see.
Okay, the paradoxes, well, you've seen Russell won't cure, no way, hurt the others, man, perhaps there are some problems. Benacerraf. Poof. Who's Benacerraf? What was the problem? And completely dissolved, and even that Hellman and Shapiro completely, like,
We had a lot of questions that I think during already the talk, but I think that we could have other questions in the end. I have at least 3 or 4, but okay.
Yeah,
Peter.
this stuff has been around for a while, right?
yes,
And so my question is, why hasn't it been more successful in mathematical communities to build about folds?
that's a good question. I have my answers to that. But I'm not sure what.
So what the question?
Why, I mean, Michael has been working on this for 30 years. Okay, the first paper he presented in 1995, published in 1998. But even the previous papers on the axiom of choice, and I didn't say anything because there are some implications about category theory here underlying this. The notion of a functor has to be adjusted. If you're going up to isomorphism, it's not the functor f of x is equal what? No, it's the isomorphic. Then so you have to fiddle around things like that. And he did. Okay, so there was a consistent way of doing this. Why? Well, one thing I can say is that after he published this paper in 1998, he had this volume which is available on his website but never published. I suspect that he wasn't satisfied with it. He never told me why. He wanted to rewrite it all and stuff like that. So he just left it there. And then he started working on higher dimensional categories with colleagues, and he published some papers on higher dimensional categories from a certain perspective. And that perspective was inspired by folds a lot. So he worked on this for a while, and then he was sort of, I guess, really disappointed to see that people didn't pick it up, that they didn't understand what he was trying to do in some sense. And he didn't publish more. He gave some papers and so on. A lot of what I've said is available as a website and short papers and stuff like that. But
And
why
did
didn't, why
Did you
was
publish it or not?
not officially? He never submitted.
No,
it.
you.
Oh, did I? I published a short paper on this, which no, it doesn't contain all the stuff that I think should have been said. But it's a good question, but is it
There wasn't a community built around it
that's true.
for some strange reason that I don't understand, because I find it a very elegant solution, which later on was redone with homotopy type theory, but
And there's basically a slide. A bunch of them.
Well, I think
Well, about a perspective on univalent foundations and structure identity principle inform our
by
efforts.
yes.
my fault, but even
And maybe it's getting more credit now because of these developments, but there was never a system where people tried to do formal mathematics inside folds with an implementation. And I
Right.
think it's possible. It has some advantages.
but perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps that would be nice.
Might be an interesting thing to do, actually, to
Yeah.
compare it to existing formal proof
Right,
systems,
because
right?
one thing that it does very clearly is it brings in category theory at the earliest possible level, rather than what type theory is doing, which is sort of building the structures and then building categories as one of these structures.
But now here is a radical criticism, not to criticize, but to better understand.
You can criticize.
No, but it's not my intention. It's not that I do not want to criticize. You know me. I have no problem criticizing.
I do.
Yeah, that's not the question. The radical criticism that one can imagine is that, okay, you have another sort of set theory. This other sort of this theory has at least a lot of, but quite macroscopic difference with usual set theory is signature is much more extended. So this extraordinary set theory that only signature is one element. Here you need 5, if I understand well. Then you need to accept a notion of function as a sort of intuitive notion that is not clearly defined. It's true that is also true for set theory at the end of the story. Because
Well, von Neumann.
what the function is set theory is not.
Wait. Von Neumann did axiomatized set theory with the notion of a function.
No. In fact, I say that this is not really a great difference because the notion of function you have to include also set theory in some sense. But in any case, the signature of set theory is much more abstract. Right? And then in the end, you need all that to construct something as category theory that for the pure purpose of making mathematics inside, it's possibly more elegant, but you have the same result that you already have with ZFC because you can make also in ZFC a lot of mathematics. I don't know whether all the mathematics I make here you can make in ZFC and vice versa, but for the large part of classical mathematics, you can make it in ZFC, you can make here. So in the end of the story, what you gain here, what is the gain of this operation? Elegant, sure, very elegant. But if I start from the point of view, I want better to understand category theory, so I am very happy. I finally understand category theory. So I'm very happy. But in the end of the story, my purpose is not to understand the category theory, is not to understand category structuralism. My purpose is to found mathematics, why I need this apparatus when I already have seen. Repeat, it's not a criticism. I want to understand the point. So why? What is the purpose in the end of the story? That is not to defend the structuralism, categorical structuralism.
There are many. There are many. Okay, there are many things that I could say. One thing that I want to say immediately, for instance, you can actually reconstruct the usual regular sets within this universe. They turn out to be trees. There are structures. And so you can reproduce standard ZF theory in that universe, and that's not a problem.
Of course, you take a much richer.
Well, it turns out
And
that the ZF sets are complicated. In fact, they are trees of things that are decomposed in a certain way. They are not as easy as you think. Mine are really simpler. You might find the signature more complicated, but the sets are not. The language is more complicated and it reflects the ontology that I'm dealing with. That's one thing. The other thing that I think that Michael really had in mind, there's a whole lot of mathematics that suddenly you can do it. Because it's so close, it is so close to the standard first order logic. It's sort of a restriction of first order logic with a signature. You can do model theory. You can do, and of course you can do what Bourbaki wanted to do, but you can do also Tarski's model theory with the signature and all that. You can extend all these results. And you can do that in categories, and then you can go up to R. So you have this, the goal here is to have this global picture of the whole universe of abstract structures at hand, knowing that that's not the whole of mathematics. Okay? Let's be clear, applied math exists. And there are situations, even in abstract mathematics, where you want to fix things. Okay, but you can always move to the abstract representation if you want to.
And the other element that you say begin at the first sentence that you say.
All sets.
So show me one your element in this theory.
Well, look, Marco, you learned set theory when you were in high school, and they all said, "Here's a set." There you go.
Yes, but so you're that you understand. But now I can say these are your elements, but I can say these are points. So what?
So that's one representation. Okay. The concept is that you have atomic elements in your sets. That's it. And you can, if I give you one, you can say this one is different from that one. Oh, this is the same one. That's it.
So in the end of the story, your elements are nothing but elements of set that are not set. So you say nothing more about what is neural element.
There are things
Absolutely.
about which you can only say.
So
they are
you mean
equal
say
or
when
not.
you go,
That's the.
when,
And-
when you go lower and lower and lower, you have a limit. That's what you said.
I'm very limited. The only things the only properties of that these sets have is their cardinality. They're like cardinals with
Okay,
things in them.
one and two.
For cardinals, you
One,
also
it's
need
first
a
one
theory,
and then
right?
a cosine.
Sorry?
For cardinals, you also need a theory.
Yeah, which is what this theory is.
So, please
That's
go.
pretty
Not
close to what
understand,
Mackay's theory is, actually.
But it's also close to what how Contour was thinking of sets, apparently.
Please.
And if
Do
you read,
you have a power set for UR element?
yeah, you have a power set.
Ah, okay.
Of course you have a power set.
Okay.
And also, if you read Maurice Fréchet, who invented metric spaces and topological spaces, when he talks about sets, he talks about abstract sets all the time. He doesn't have ZF in mind at all. He has these things in mind.
Mhm.
And the points are somehow, if you look at a functional space, okay, the functions are your points. But there's a line where you decide that it doesn't matter that they are functions, they become abstract elements because you work with the axioms. So you forget about the fact that you have a space of functions. It's symmetric space.
There's also Frankel-Mostowski set theory. Is that related?
I don't know. Good question.
It's also with UR element, and then they have a permutation action.
Yeah. And I know also, what's his name? Barwise also had a whole theory with UR elements. So it's not as if you couldn't put UR elements in the standard set theory. You can do that.
One and two. Please.
Yeah,
And three.
I just wanted to ask about, in all type theories with like univalence, sometimes it's hard to specify exactly what it is, but you get like a form of constructivity that you can recover because in a lot of times when you're doing standard stuff, you have to like ocean out and then like choose a representative. Right. So you can kind of keep that information with you as you go. That makes it kind of easier. As far as this stuff goes, I feel like I'm not even sure what a constructive thing here was.
Well,
And I was
okay, I'm
wondering
not
if you-
sure I can answer this. There's theory you can do this with logistic logic.
Yeah.
That's it's sort of an obvious thing. We're in first order logic, so the rules for the connected. You decide to just take the rules for the logic, which Michael wants to do. So, but the constructive thing that if you could be in a similar situation if you're in your axioms for the new category of sets, you don't have the axioms for that it is well pointed, for instance, then you get constructive set theory.
Have inside this logic, particular what the power set axiom would look like.
Well, it's standard power set in categorical logic,
But
in topos theory.
so you're saying something like there is an object classifier, and then the objects of these object. I mean, the objects of the power set are not sets, are just.
Exactly. They have to be Euro elements. That's why you use the universal property.
So one of your axioms is it's Cartesian closed,
Exactly.
and another is that you have subobject classifiers, and therefore you've got powers. Essentially.
Yeah, essentially.
That-
The standard way you can use this.
So
Universal property.
Is Mackay's theory equiconsistent with yours?
Good question. I don't know. The way he presented it once, you have, if you write down all the axioms that he has, you automatically has the fact that inaccessible categorials exists. You don't have to add that. It follows from the whole thing. And he has all this political.
And you can prove the continuum hypothesis.
No. No. These are.
So, well, the one thing that I would wonder about is does the axiom of replacement?
That's a standard objection.
Yeah.
But I have no, I blank. But But I think Mike Schulman has shown something about that, and I think
Yeah.
it can be done in that framework.
So what's the objection about that?
Well, that's not an
You
objection.
cannot, you cannot formulate the action replacement here.
Does anyone know
Here.
who is what?
Oh, yeah.
Elements, something relations.
Yeah, I can't remember that, but there's a solution around that. Well, there's a way of writing
No,
it.
it wasn't an objection. It's just that I don't see how you formulated it.
Exactly, it is, that's the,
Yeah,
that's
action
the,
replacement.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, whether you need it anyway.
exactly.
The axiom of replacement has always seemed very strange to me.
But
You can make a theory, it's a theory with a separation without replacement. It's a little bit.
It's very weak.
it's weak.
Yeah, exactly. So
It's a
full
weak-
replacement is a pretty strong axiom because it says if I have this bijection,
Yeah.
if I have anything that has the same size as a set, what the heck does that mean? It means I have classes which you don't have. So a class which is the same size as a set is a set. That's replacement, right? But if you don't have
But
classes,
overall, the
No,
action
it cannot be
replacement.
that exactly.
But there's a way,
well, I mean,
You could have
yeah,
a.
okay, it's a paraphrase, but
Yeah.
I mean, you have a
You
first
have
order
the class-
formula
Sorry.
that says, and if from that first order formula, you can prove that this set is bijective with elements from the universe, so that's just a class.
So if there's
Then those
the
guys,
formula that says that.
yeah,
Then.
yeah, it's actually a family of, it's not an axiom, it's an axiom scheme.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so one thing that sort of I found very interesting in the way you presented this, right, is that you sort of presented this theory of abstract sets you presented as some sort of like anti-iterative conception, right, where unlike an iterative conception where you can actually iterate this operation of set binding, right, you can only do it once.
right,
Now, usually in the iterative conception of sets, right, the reason why people like it is that because then you get justification of the axioms.
yes,
Right. So you don't just have to assume that unions exist or power sets exist, you can actually explain why.
because in this universe,
So unless I miss something, you do not have this in your anti-iterative conception, right? You can't just say, well, the power, something like, a power set object exists because of my conception of.
okay, I see what you mean, yes. Well, that's.
Okay, or can you do
The
that?
real, the real story is this, is to try to do this. I didn't have time, but
Okay.
when you would have to try to, by looking at from the minimal theory, how you extend it, you'd have to be able to justify these axioms one by one by having this picture of these abstract sets and keeping that picture as abstract sets. For instance,
Justify or to prove?
no, that's why you justify.
Or the action remain action.
For instance, the axioms that products exist.
Right.
And that you write it in that way, in the way that's the categorical logic. Well, that's precisely because all the sets have U elements that you have to write it that way. Because it imposes a constraint on how you will write things, because you cannot write the product as being made of sets.
Right.
So you will have to use a universal property to define these things. It will justify that. So the fact that these sets can only have U elements sort of explains or justify the fact that you're using that definition to introduce the product.
Right, but there's still a difference between explaining why you have to use the definition versus what justification you have for introducing these things, right? And I think this goes back to sort of standard, objection that people raise against ETCS, right? Just if you have like this sort of set theoretic exception, then discovering that you can define a Cartesian product and that it has the property, the projection property, it is some sort of like, it is an epistemic gain, right?
Right.
But if you start by just saying, I'm going to consider categories in which I have these products, then you're sort of getting robbed of the epistemic advantage, the epistemic gain of realizing that you can define certain things, right? And so I think for your anti-iterative conception to be really, like a strong candidate against the iterative conception, maybe, then you would also be able to tell a story where people read it and like, oh, and then that's why I can form a power set.
Right.
Right. And ideally, this would be rooted in the fact that, I mean, I think maybe actually this is highly possible for power set, because you could think of, you know, like power set have to be like sets of maps in some way or other. Right? So if you're looking at a category, you have all the maps, then you should be able to form a set of maps,
Right.
forgetting that they're maps,
Right.
or just thinking intercardinality, right?
Yeah.
So that might be like
One
an
way of
option.
doing it.
Yeah, one way of doing it. But I think the more you're able to do this, the more, you know, the stronger this anti-iterative conception becomes.
I agree.
And I think the more you know flash you put on the whole project.
Yeah, I agree.
So would the idea of power set, would the idea of power set be the category of categories in your framework? Like you talk about power set and set theory.
Yeah, well, but no, I have
but you
power
have to
sets
do
in my universe.
Yeah, but what you really, okay, so I thought maybe what you really would want to do is to iterate the category of the category.
Yeah, but that I do. It's just saying that if you take the totality of these sets, it's not a set. But it is a category. Okay, and that is sort of, I just realized it, so to speak. It's a new type. And it cannot be a set. When I take categories,
yeah,
then I look at them and the similar argument will arise. Is it the totality of one categories cannot be a one category, and it doesn't have an underlying set for the same reason. Therefore, I have to introduce a new type, and that will be the type of two categories, weak two categories. And I go on like this. If I take the totality of weak two categories, it cannot be a weak two categories. So I have to introduce a new type, weak three categories. With a new signature. So I do have this thing, it's not a utilitarian, but for the sets, you're right. I agree with you, you're absolutely correct. But the goal would be to have this narrative complete.
But
narrative
in a set theory, you have an axiom that tells that this empty set exists. Okay?
Mhm.
And then you have axiom that generate the universal set.
Yeah, here I have the axioms that there is an initial object.
Right. So here, how you prove the existence of one set? So I want to prove the existence of a set so in this way. For example, an inductive set. So you say
But he's in, I mean, I'm gonna defend this. So you have an initial object, so there is. There's a terminal object, so there is a set that has one element in it.
no, but this is
Or-
essentially this question.
And you have a natural number object.
Exactly, then the inductive.
There's an axiom of infinity as well.
Exactly.
So
In Mackay's version.
So you need to repeat the axiom of the theory within this context. That is the point. The axiom
I
that
would call it that.
perhaps it's not all of them, but you need to repeat an axiom.
Well, you need axioms. I need axioms for sure. I mean,
And axioms that are going to allow you to do the important part of set theory.
and then these axioms have to describe, I'm doing mathematics. They have to describe as much as possible how this kind of mathematics
Yes,
is
but
done.
I want to say, you have a slide here in which you say, I give 5 axioms, if I remember well.
Yeah.
Associativity. These are only the basic axioms. Then we have to add.
Other axioms.
Okay, great.
Yeah, sure.
The equality of the within every set is that do you need that because
Oh, yeah, you
of
do.
because of
the
the
functions,
functions, right?
composition of
You
functions,
want
you need to
find that-
do that.
Yeah.
They're equal.
The function is
I need that.
Yeah, that's an
really-
interesting commitment that you're taking functions to be the
The primitive
the
notion.
prior thing.
I don't see any way around.
Well,
But,
I mean, relations.
But the thesis,
Okay.
If you're using regular logic, then there's,
Yeah.
we know that
Relations,
we can
yeah.
translate between relations and
Yeah.
functions.
Yeah.
But you would have to have at least regular logic.
Yeah.
I think.
but the thesis, there is at least an antecedent. It's called Frege. Frege
Well,
was thinking that
that's
notion of
fine.
function is
That-
primitive. And this is for the reason for which he was against the set theory in some sense, because the set theory or do not understand what is an arbitrary set. What is it? It was against the action of extensionality. What I like here, there is not action of extensionality. That is really something completely crazy, the action of extensionality. And this is very Fregean in spirit.
Yes.
Nothing extensionality because the action of extensionality make you lose the control of your object, But the notion of function, okay, because the rational function you perfectly is perfectly understandable. So in this sense, it's very Fregean in nature.
In some ways, it's.
But okay, but then there is. Not what
It is Fregean in the other in this other sense that to any totality should correspond an object, a type.
Exactly.
So if I have the totality of sets, there should correspond an object to it, which is in this case a category.
Yeah.
If I take the totality of categories of one, there should be an object corresponding to that. That's a two category.
Isn't the basic criticism though untouched? I mean, there.
That I need a notion of set.
Yeah, from Pfefferman onward, that's.
But I have a Pfefferman's argument was that I'm not sure whether Saul was going all the way, but it's as if. So either you say you need a naive notion of set, to which I would say yes, or you say you need this particular notion of set that is provided by ZF, to which I say no. There's an alternative. That there's a different conception of a theory of sets that is at work here.
But in fact, you
As
do not need a notion of set. You have a primitive that is the set. Is that so?
Yeah, but then I describe it.
Yes,
as
but you do
abstract.
not need to understand the primitive set as a set. This is a primitive that satisfies the axioms.
Yeah, okay, if you want to see it.
So
For set theory itself, you need a naive notion of set to start with.
Of course.
It's
But here
class
I have a
just-
naive notion of set to start.
In theory, you have no primitive notion of set. Why? You have the axioms. The notion of set is
Or you're a formalist. Mark,
Satisfy
or
the
the
action.
different strings you can write down.
Not going there.
Even to write down all the different, like recursion, you need to define what a proof is. You're gonna need some notion of set to like write down the definition.
The ZFC is just there to try to explain what a set is. So
Right, but proofs involving it first, as soon as you have first order logic and you have proofs in Hilbert's logic.
Mhm.
Then you have an inductive notion of proof, which means you have a natural number object before you've even started.
Okay, this is Poincaré. This is the classical section of Poincaré.
Legitimate.
You need a natural number from the very beginning because you need recursion to make logic. You have no logic without recursion.
Exactly. This is like, I think it's like.
But this is
I
true
think
also
it's a
here.
really apt point that you need this at least the naive
Yeah.
notion of a natural number.
So in some sense, to make logic, we need an intuitive notion of recursion, because
Yes.
otherwise we cannot even begin to make logic. When you define simply what is a term in first order logic, you need a recursion, you need induction. So okay, that is very well known.
But that's the point of what Spencer was saying, at least that naivete you need.
Okay.
And that's probably this is kind of the similar to the naive notion of set needed for this.
But well, certainly, because you also need recursive definition.
of course.
and so on.
But I think again, the problem is this distinction between the structural axioms and the accessory axioms, right? Because in one case, there are things that you impose because you want to study particular structures that satisfy these things, and that's okay, right? The other kind are those that are intrinsically justified by the conception that is at work in your meta theory. And I think that this sort of, when people say, I guess Pfefferman's argument that you need sets to understand TCS is to understand why you're introducing these axioms and think of them in a accessory way, so intrinsically justified. You need something that's essentially the iterative conception of set. And so I think if you really want to take up that challenge of saying, in the meta theory, we have this, there are things that we take as basic axioms that we are not going to question because they are built upon a certain kind of conception, then you can just, escape then that challenge by then saying, well, of course, everybody needs axioms to do something, right? Because you have to justify why you choose these axioms like that.
Yeah, but why not, if you're taking functions to be the primitive thing rather than elementhood, then isn't a completely primitive thing to say, I need binary functions? No, I need products. It seems to me it's a similar kind of justification.
Well, no,
There's an internal justification there
Right.
that once I've committed myself to functions, I also need binary functions.
So I think the problem is phrasing these things in terms of I need, right? Because if you explain the axiom of, you know, the union axiom.
Well, I
you need
mean,
to-
there are, no, I mean, there is addition, so I have rather than I need, I have binary functions.
Right, I
They
think
are,
this
they
is
are
getting
already
to what you
there.
have to do, yeah. So like there are those sort of things. And I think in this sort of project, this is maybe possible, right? In which you would introduce certain kind of sets as being some sort of like sets, right? So as soon as you start running functions and then you have enough sets, certain kind of cardinalities, and then you can say, you know, there has to be some sets that have these properties.
Yeah, and the hum sets have to be the right, I mean, like
Yeah.
the others. So in this case, yes, that's what
Yeah,
we're doing.
yeah, so I mean, that's why, but I think this is what we convince, I think, someone that is likely to raise a fundamental objection that, okay, this is a conception of set that is not piggybacking. This is a foundation of mathematics.
Right.
It is not piggybacking on set theory.
On set theory.
Right.
That's the goal.
Right, but you're right, you would need to do that. You
Yeah.
need to make that justification.
Yeah.
I guess that's what was not clear to me, that you have that.
Sure, I have it all. That's
Yeah,
the
but I
question.
think it's doable.
Yeah.
But-
That's
I mean, again,
that's
you
the,
have binary functions.
Sure.
And you have delayed evaluation, so you have Cartesian closure. But I mean, these are things that you have in the real world, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, I think, and the more you think.
I mean, in the same,
primitive,
in
right?
the same way that
The more
we
you
have
can
the
fit it.
iterative, I mean, right, that's already pretty weird, the iterative conception of set. So I think you could tell the story in just.
Yeah, and I think if you do it as sort of like conceptual analysis of what functions are, between these sets that are taken to be just this first level
Yeah.
thing, then that would be,
Yeah.
that'd be great, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea.
yeah, I agree.
First.
Still trying to come up with a reason why it wasn't as successful as the dominant theory right now, which is not set theory. We know that type theory won this battle.
I don't agree.
Not among philosophers.
I still not agree with
It
that.
depends on where you're coming from, but if you look at what is running the world, it's type theory.
No, it's not
question
true.
asked.
No,
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
computers
narrow-
that are running the world.
Yeah, but even
That's
even
a pretty narrow
even
time.
inside software engineering, it's not true that type programming languages have won.
Well,
Most stuff is run on type-free languages.
maybe, but the point is that I'm going to make a conjecture that the reason that it was adopted by computing is because of its very close relationship with functional programming,
That it wasn't adopted.
which wasn't mainstream. You're right, but it underlies the theory of computing in a very serious way, and it's a theory that built a community. I mean, Thierry Coquant was more successful than Marquis.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, I see. No. This argument, I
That's
don't
right.
know about that.
Because it's a building community,
Mhm.
and it's not about whether your theory is the most elegant one, it's whether it's the most practical one. And in that sense, assembly language was a very practical solution, and that's also Haman's invention, right?
Sometimes I don't think even it's a matter of being practical. Sometimes I think it's the building community is even more important than aspect.
That's what
So
we find.
they insist. For example, functional programming was not very successful at the beginning, but they insisted, and now it is, right?
At least from a theoretical point of view, I think it's won the battle. It's not, you're right, that in practical terms, the amount of software that's running and doesn't have a lot of guardrails is of course the majority.
Yeah, it's also important to think about why that is. It's
Well,
it means that type-free programming has also its advantages.
of course, yeah. That's just set theory with no
Yeah.
guardrails at all. Yeah.
Just one type programming. Type-free programming is really just one type programming.
Sure, but
It's like set theory is one type. Okay, so I suggest that insofar as any theory has your element, I suggest to double check the theory with your element of beer. Because of beer as your elements. Thank you very much. Thank you.